Welcome to Honourable Mentions. I'm Mark Ray. For as long as I can remember, whenever I sit around and chat with my friends about video games, the conversation always devolves down into what's in your top 5? What's in your top 10? What are the games you think are the best games ever? Usually, these games are agonised over for hours and hours and hours. Games get put on the list, games get taken off of the list. And it's those games that don't quite make it. The games that are your honourable mention, the game that you really want to put in there because it's doing some really interesting things, but you just can't put in there for whatever reason. Those are the games that have always interested me to talk with my friends about. So I thought, why not create a podcast where I talk to really interesting people with really interesting ideas about video games and find out what their honourable mentions are and why they love them so much. This episode, I'll be speaking to a man without whom the AI bots just simply wouldn't exist. Host of some of my favourite podcasts such as Joypod and more recently The Computer Games Show, I sat down with David Turner to find out what game doesn't quite make his list but is worthy of his honourable mention. So that's enough of my waffle. Let's get to the chat. So cheers for coming on, Dave. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, anytime. It sounds like a really good concept for a show. Talk about games that don't usually get spoken about, I guess.
Yeah, that was the idea. You know, I do. You know, it's just one of those things I just like to talk with interesting people about, like really interesting subjects that aren't just like, what's the best thing, what's the worst thing. You know, just those
totally.
weird grey areas in between.
Well, hopefully you'll find someone interesting soon and complete that goal.
Fingers crossed, mate. Fingers crossed. You know, start at the bottom, work your way up, eh?
Yeah, that's it.
So before we get started and get into your game, what I wanted to know was, not in any particular order, like what would be your sort of top 5, top 10, whatever games that would be ahead of this game in your list of like all-time games?
Man, there are some that really stick out, and it is hard to put your finger on. But you know, there are games like the ones that immediately come to me are Banjo-Kazooie, Zelda Ocarina of Time. Would definitely be up there, obviously. Probably Mass Effect 2. I think that would be there or thereabouts. I was obsessed with that. Cool. Freeze on
Freeze on the iOS.
That for me is my Tetris.
I did wonder if that was going to come up.
Yeah, you know how people look at Tetris and think it's some perfect like sort of work of art.
Yeah.
That's how I see Freeze. I'm trying to think of some more. I mean, Halo, Combat Evolved would be up there.
Is that because like that was just like in your early development, as far as I can sort of remember, of like sort of getting into games?
It wasn't actually. It was a little bit later than because I'll go into this later. But there's this whole timeline of first-person shooters that you can sort of track through my life with computer games, right. and that was sort of the pinnacle at one point. I mean, it got me into multiplayer shooters. That's wrong actually. I was into multiplayer shooters anyway.
Yeah. But
that took it to the next level where I was becoming obsessed rather than just enjoying them. You know what I mean? It was like a real sort of, yeah, and both sides of it was so strong, right? So you had the incredible multiplayer stuff and then the single player campaign, which you would genuinely play over and over again because you were quite happy to do so in co-op. But yeah, and it was the first real game that took the new style of controls to console gaming, and like that game is still very much playable now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it refined a lot, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And a lot of first person shooters that come after it stole so much from it. And don't get me wrong, that's been. I mean, when you work through, say, my timeline of first person shooters that I love playing so much. It's there are plenty of games on there that seem to have added so much to the genre, like even Titanfall and stuff with its parkour, and Rainbow Six with its various different characters and stuff like that. There's a lot in these games that seem to pass on, but that one seemed to be such a huge step from what I'd been playing previously, that it was kind of like, okay, this is really important. This game is really important. And of course it led to like Halo 2, Halo 3, like all those games I really enjoyed playing online and playing in multiplayer. So yeah, it was a big deal for me, that one.
Fantastic. So obviously then first person, the game that you've chosen is obviously a first person shooter. I'm just taking random wild guess, as you said there was going to be something coming up later on. So, what is the game you've chosen for us to talk about today?
Well, let me explain my thought process, right? Because
settling
the concept of this show. This concept of this show has screwed with my head a little bit because I'm thinking. Obviously, you instantly think about, okay, what's in your top 10 computer games, or what are your favorite games of all time? And then there are games that sort of sit outside of that. And I instantly went along the route of thinking of a game that I know isn't a 10 out of 10. It's not a 9, even a 9 out of 10. But I absolutely adored. So my mind instantly drifted to Mafia 2. And I know that if anyone's heard me on any other podcast before, pretty much every podcast I have to mention how much I loved that game. And the game had flaws, and that's what would keep it out of my top 10. And there were things that I didn't agree with. They were in there. There was some rough. The game was very rough around the edges, but it did so much that felt so unique and worthwhile. That it was just absolutely incredible to me. I loved every minute of that game. And but then I thought, well, I've spoken about that far too much to come up with anything more interesting. And B, is that the right way to think of it, right? Because that's a very personal game to me. And if someone turned around to me and said I played half an hour and I didn't like it, I would completely understand.
Yeah, see,
I'd be angry at them.
To me, that was that was part of the original concept, was just kind of like, I love certain games. Like I love Far Cry 3, right? There is I have a massive soft spot in my heart for that. It's not a great game. It's not even a great first-person shooter, but there is something about that hooked me over one Christmas, and I couldn't let it go. And it's a beautiful game for me in many different ways, which I won't go into now. And I just thought, I wonder what other people's games like that are, where they can't say, oh, it's in my top 10 or my top 5, but I've got this really deep personal connection to it. But sounding from the game that you've picked, this is another that you've gone down a completely different route.
Yeah, so my thought was, okay, so when I was thinking about my top 10, this one didn't even enter into my mind, and which is crazy because a lot of people rate it, and a lot of people say it's one of the best shooters, definitely multiplayer shooters. And the game is Time Splitters 2, right?
Fantastic.
And there's a specific reason why it cannot make my top 10. And that's simply because that game was so of its time, right? When you look at the progression of computer games from what we were playing on PS1, N64, that sort of period up until today, I don't think any genres evolved. Not even so much evolved, but I don't think any genre has got over a barrier as big as controlling a first-person shooter online. First-person shooter on a console, right? So when we were playing on the N64, we didn't have 2 sticks, and I mean, GoldenEye came out, and it was perfectly playable, and we loved it, and it was one of the best games of all time, because that would certainly be up there for me.
But it was one of the only experiences like that around, so it didn't have much to live up to.
That's right, and it introduced the idea of split-screen gaming when everyone was still playing online shooters and stuff. I say everyone, I mean a very small amount of people were playing, on their 56k modems, me included. That split screen stuff just made all that very simple, right? So there was no difficulties of trying to find servers and getting people together and that. It was just when everyone was together, if we had 4 pads, we're going to play split screen GoldenEye. I mean, that's standard. And Time Splitters 2 fell just before the likes of Halo, really, where no one had really mastered how to play or design games for consoles, first-person shooters for consoles. Certainly not, control-wise.
Yeah.
And it just fell before the big breakthrough of Halo, where it was like, no, this feels right. This is how to do it. Yeah. So the reason why it wouldn't, and I mean, there's a huge string of first-person shooters that I've been through because of the changing control scheme, it automatically sort of raises it above Time Splitters 2 to make my top. my top 10. So through no fault of its own, and ironically because it's Time Splitters, it's about time travel and stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's set in that period where it was released, it will never be in my top 10.
So it's a victim of its own time. It's just this perfect bubble of that era.
That's right, because when you sent me the concept of this show on the email, you said here's a few questions that might come up, and one of the questions was, how would you now try and convince people to go back and play this? And I was like, well, I wouldn't sit down and tell someone to play it, because I know that these sort of standardized controls from the Halo period right the way up to through Call of Duty, through Battlefield and stuff like that, to present day, it's changed so differently and been so ingrained into our sort of brains on how to control these games that Time Splitters 2 will just feel insane, like absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you mean I'm controlling a crosshair on the screen rather than the full screen? What do you mean that if I want to go for a headshot, I have to hold down a button and sort of tilt the controller a little bit, like the stick a little, the right stick a little bit?
It was always trying to ape a PC sort of control scheme, but with really, really, ham-fistedly on a controller.
Well, it was designed obviously by essentially the same skeleton that was behind GoldenEye.
No, exactly.
It
was like a breakaway team, wasn't
project.
It? Yeah, from Rare.
Yeah, and you so that's how GoldenEye played, right? Time Splitters 2 played very similar to GoldenEye,
yes.
And GoldenEye was designed for a controller with one stick on it. And when I look back and just think, hold on, we had a second stick here. We had a second stick.
Yeah.
This is insane.
This is like VR is now, I suppose, isn't it? Like everyone's sort of searching for what is the control scheme that works with VR, and no one's quite cracked it yet. And there's like sort of 3 or 4 different ways to do it. And this is where we are with the twin stick shooter.
Totally. We had the hardware back then. We just didn't have the understanding of what's best to do.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why I couldn't recommend it to people these days, because it was so of its time that it would be hard to sort of translate what made that game so good. And I mean, it is good. I mean, it's fantastic. An incredible computer.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to describe to people why that was such a good game.
Have you been back to it since, like, those years back in the 90s?
I have. I have. 2000s. I tried. There was an Xbox version that came out that wasn't anywhere. So the version we played more than anything else was the PlayStation 2 version.
Right. Yeah.
The game also come out on other consoles. I think there was a GameCube version.
Yes.
And
the original.
I know
Xbox.
There was an Xbox version because we bought the Xbox version, and it just we didn't like it as much. I can't remember why. I think it might have been down to the controllers.
Yeah.
Which seems mad. Because once the S-Pad come out, it was all good.
That was it.
But yeah, so I had a modded Xbox, like 90% of the people in England did during that period, and I had that constantly set up even way into the 360 era. And just as the 360 era was coming to an end, it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to pack away my original Xbox. If these new consoles are going to come out. So let me just see what's on the hard drive, and Time Splitters 2 was on there, and I tried to play it, and it was almost unplayable. And I remember how much I played that game, and I remembered how good I got at it.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, how the hell did I get to that point? How the hell did I
become so accurate and...
Yeah, and the Siberia mission, we were doing headshots was like essential on the harder difficulty settings and stuff like that. How did I play this? But that was just because first-person shooters moved on. And I mean, if you go back and play GoldenEye, you feel the same. You kind of feel, what the hell is going on? How did I control this? How was I getting headshots and stuff?
So I went back to this about 6 months ago, and I had exactly the same thing where I instantly wanted to go left trigger, right trigger without thinking. That was just muscle memory. And then realizing that, like you say, you're moving the reticle around like it was Operation Wolf, and it was just I couldn't get my head around it. It was just completely broken to me. But at the time, it was completely natural. It was just, of course it works like this. Why wouldn't it work like that?
It just wasn't an issue. And then when you look at if you go on YouTube and look at some of the challenges, like the harder challenges in the game, I remember one where you were on a bridge and there was a frozen lake and it would chuck loads of monkeys at you, and you had to shoot as many monkeys as you could, as far away from you as you could to raise the points, and pass the challenge. And I just remember being shit hot at it, like spending so much time with it. Like if I missed a couple, that was it. Pause, reset, and then just trying to beat my score, trying to beat my friends' scores, and ultimately try and get enough trophies to unlock characters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'd look at that now and just think that was literally impossible, and no one's ever been able to do that. But it's weird knowing that I did.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
Yeah, exactly. So you've said a lot of things about how, you know, it's difficult to go back to, and it's tough to look at, and so on and so forth, and whatever, and how you couldn't recommend it. But what are the positives in this game? What are the things that, like you say, doesn't make it on your list, but just makes it amazing for you? What does it do brilliant?
Yeah, I've been horrendously negative so far, and I didn't mean to be.
No, not at all.
I just wanted to sort of explain why it wouldn't be in my top 10, and literally because it's in its own time bubble. And so let me tell you what. Firstly, I was a Time Splitters fan before Time Splitters 2, and there wasn't a lot of us at the time. Time Splitters 1 came out on the PS2, and it was very basic. In fact, it felt like, even at the time, it felt like to the quality of like sort of an indie game.
Yeah, it
was like a very low budget,
like a tech demo,
very
almost.
Standard game. Yeah, almost exactly like a tech demo. I can't remember if it was a launch title, but it was definitely at the start of the PS2's life. Yeah, it was really, really early on. And I was interested in it because I liked first-person shooters, and I'd heard that it was, you know, some of the GoldenEye guys had worked on it. And I adored it. I loved it for what it was. It was just brilliant. And when my friends weren't around, the single player was a bit of a joke, but the multiplayer was actually genuinely really good.
It was one of the first kind of coming back from the clubs, and, you know, all your mates would pile in and just stay up till 4 a.m. and, you know, play multiplayer Time Splitters.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I think for me personally, I mean, it wasn't like that for me, but for me personally, it was more, I had a friend that also adored GoldenEye and also adored Time Splitters, the first one, and so we just spent just the two of us playing it over and over again, and we would set up different game modes with different bots, the amount of bots, and all sorts of stuff like that. We just spent hours on it, and we went through the campaign stuff in co-op, and although it was a bit crap, we still got enjoyment out of it because it was the two of us playing Time Splitters together, and that was cool. Then when Time Splitters 2 was announced, I was instantly excited for it. And I would buy magazines, I would flick through the read the features, and there was something about the artwork that just, it was so different to every other game around it. You know, it was kind of Team Fortress 2 before Team Fortress, and
there was a amazing cartoony art style, wasn't it? It was just, didn't take itself too seriously.
Oh, the complete opposite. It took the mick out of itself. It was silly. It was stupid. Like, it was openly dumb. I mean, it was stupid, and that was what was brilliant about it. And then I remember seeing it was either a demo disc or something showing the first level of the campaign, and just thinking, this is it. This is next gen GoldenEye. They've nailed it. They've absolutely nailed it. So I was getting that. I was always going to get that game day one.
Yeah.
I remember getting it, loading it up for the first time, and just being blown away. Not necessarily by I was blown away by the game itself, but also how much was in it. I mean, going from Time Splitters 1 to 2 is incredible, because in Time Splitters 1, it was kind of like, here are some game modes, here are some maps, and here's a bit of a weak campaign. With Time Splitters 2, it was like challenges, huge campaign, various different sort of levels, and the whole idea that it was parodied in like, it was a parody of like cliche films and movies and stuff. So you had like the Western stuff in there, you had the spy stuff in there, you had the futuristic sci-fi shooting in there, and then seeing all the challenges on the side, which were fun to play. Then there was all the game modes in multiplayer, along with all of the maps. There was a huge amount of maps, and then just thinking, like, continue to play it, and just like discovering these secrets where you could, like, you had a little computer with you that you could bring up, and you could find little cartridges for it around levels on certain. I think they were restricted to certain difficulty settings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you could play like a version of Snake. It was called Anaconda, and it had one of the best musical soundtracks I've ever heard in my life. If you've got YouTube on your mobile device, or you're near a computer that has access to the internet, search Anaconda.
Right.
Time Splitters 2, because the music is just off the charts good.
Right. I am going to be dropping this in the background as we're talking.
Whack it in. So it's and then once we got into it a little bit more, we played the campaign through in co-op, and it got to the point where we would just know everything about the game. We would know at exactly what moment this character would move. We would know that if we shoot this character, we've got 5 seconds to make it to here before this character comes in, and if we land a grenade here, we know that we'll get 4 enemies turn up, but if we put it over here, we'll get 3, and then we can take the last one out by doing this. It got that technical because it was very different. It was very difficult on the high
settings. This is what I was going to say to you. I've heard, and from what I've read about this game, is that it's got the difficulty curves a little bit all over the place. So did you ever feel that was a problem, or was it just the fact that you just so rinsed and repeated the game that you just clocked it, you just knew everything about it?
It probably helped that we'd spent so much time with Time Splitters 1.
Yeah.
So we knew what the game would feel like, and we kind of had an idea on how to take on levels and stuff like that. But no, the standard, the default game setting, the difficulty setting wasn't too difficult at all, really. It was very doable.
Right.
And we found we didn't really struggle with it at all. It wasn't until we just like knocked up the difficulty settings a couple of clicks, and then it was like, okay, this is tough. And instead of like chuck it, because I mean it had that horrible thing where it would just restart you at the start of the level if you fucked up. And it was kind of like that. I mean, again, that was very of its time, but it was what people refer to as Groundhog Day gaming, where every time you did that, you were like, okay, that didn't work, let's try this. And then you're building up a knowledge of everything that happens in your journey to the end of this level, and then executing.
Very much like that new Hitman game is at the moment, where
you're
literally trying everything, and then going back, and then it's exactly the same level, exactly the same way it's going to pan out, but I'm going to try it this different way, and then another way, and another way, and another way, and you get so much more fun out of it.
There's I mean, not all games can get it right.
No.
There's a lot of people complain about trial and error gaming. And I think there are games that don't understand how to do trial and error. Like, people now refer to trial and error gaming as a inherently bad thing, and I don't think it is. I just think it needs to be done right.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think back to old arcade games, a lot of that was trial and error game to try and take your money. But what they did was it spurred you on and made you want to. If it was done well, and it was done in a way that it was hiding the fact that it was trying to take your money, you got excitement out of it, and that's what drew you back in, to spend that.
And there's also games like more recently, like Dark Souls, where that does feel trial and error at times, because there are certain move patterns that you've got to learn, and you're not going to know straight away. It's not instantly about skill. You need to build up your knowledge with
Absolutely.
that game. And okay, that brings a lot more skill into it, but that's trial and error gaming done right. So every time you die, you've done it because you've slipped up, and I guess that's kind of like, if we would die in Time Splitters 2, it would be because one of us was out of place. And it was kind of like, no, come on, you're not supposed to be there. Once you get that one, you need to make that shot to make sure the alarm doesn't go off and stuff like that. So yeah, that was it done right. But the campaign was okay, and I mean it was pretty good,
serviceable.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if that's all there was, then I suppose it'd be disappointing, but there wasn't. There was a hell of a lot of other stuff, and there were like dips in quality. Some levels were a bit like just a bit naff. There was nothing quite as good as the first level, which was the game's the campaign side of things. That was its biggest crime.
That was the dam level.
Essentially, it was like a rip of the GoldenEye dam level was called Siberia, and it was all set in snow and had the security cameras that GoldenEye did that you could snipe out, and it felt like GoldenEye.
Yeah.
Whereas no other level really did.
See what I love about that is the fact that that new game Homefront Revolution. Basically some of that the team from that was partly the team that was Free Radical. So they've snuck.
Oh, right.
If you go to, I think it's Philadelphia, there's an arcade machine in there. If you use it, you get the first 2 levels from Time Splitters 2.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, in Homefront Revolution. So you can actually play them, and it's with the controls as of nowadays.
Oh, really? Now that would be interesting to see how it actually feels.
It actually plays, yeah. But yeah, no, I just thought that was a really little nod, considering apparently they don't have that team don't have the rights to that game, Time Splitters 2, because it's a Crytek game. So
I wonder how they got away with that.
I don't know if they licensed it, if they just snuck it in there. It's a bit of a mystery, but it'd be interesting to find out how and why, and how that.
Well, let's hope they get sued.
Yeah, let's.
Thieves.
Scum. Burn them.
Yeah. So that stuff was fantastic.
Yeah.
But then that's not what we played it for. We played it for the multiplayer.
I was going to say.
And I think it was the first game that we played. A lot of people's first system link game where you hook up more than one console was Halo. Like people gathered together with multiple Xboxes,
LAN
put
parties.
them through Ethernet hub, and played system link Halo, right? So because then you could play 16 players. With Time Splitters 2, we were playing 8 players with 2 PS4s. So we had multi taps. Plugged all our DualShocks in, four on each screen.
So many wires.
And we would play. It was full of wires. There was we had a iLink cable, which was this small USB to USB thing that plugged into the little blue square at the bottom right of the console. And if that would regularly get knocked out because the wire was actually pretty short.
Yeah. And
we would put like a sofa in between the 2 consoles, so we couldn't see their side and they couldn't see ours.
Oh, amazing.
And what grabbed us was that as good as the shooting stuff was, all the other stuff was brilliant as well. Like the virus mode was just we spent so much time on virus mode. So virus mode was it basically. One person had a virus. You've got to touch you've got to touch other players and find them and touch them, and then once that all spreads, and you join the team with the virus, and it's the last man standing wins. And it was just so much fun, like experiencing multiplayer gaming with 7 other mates at the time. Like with GoldenEye, it was fun enough with 4, but when you add another 4 people on top of that, it was like, wow, this really is just something special.
So many more voices, so much more, for want of a better word, banter.
And all of you in the same room. So like all of the discussions about the game were going on, winding each other up and all that sort of stuff. It seemed to be magnified, which all that stuff was in GoldenEye, and it all felt brilliant.
So it's such a shame
to have it with 8 players.
Yeah, it's such a shame that multiplayer in a room feeling has gone away somewhat. I mean, I know you've got Xbox Live and PSN, and you've got headsets, but there's something intangible about having a group of people in a room together and like being able to nudge your mate and go, why'd you do that for? What'd you do this for? And I don't know, there's something magical about having that sort of same room experience.
Yeah, and I don't think it has gone away. I think that's a bit of a myth. I just think like we've got older, and I think if internet gaming was about at the time, then we'd be banging into that as well.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, and maybe the multiplayer side that we love so much wouldn't have been as big as we think it would have at the time,
Right, gotcha.
I don't think it's gone away. I just think we don't have lots of friends that also have the same console.
Yeah.
That can come over to our house to play for.
I was going to say, I suppose like you've got your little, you've got your son. I've got my son who's just turned up. We're not going to go and sit around someone's house for 10 hours, Oh, we. Oh, yeah.
No,
I brought my
no, of
kid
course
with
not.
me and my wife, and we're all going to sit around and play Goldeneye or Time Splitters. It's just not going to happen, is it?
No, but then I'll be meeting up with some friends at some point this year to just sit down and relive that stuff again. You know,
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
playing games in the same room. So it's not dead. It's just that it's just you know, people have got better ways of doing it, and people have moved on and got older and stuff. But yeah. So I mean, it wasn't just the fact that it was a multiplayer game for you know, up to 8 people locally. There was also the fact that it just played really well, like really, like incredibly well. All of the game modes were fun. There were so many different characters to choose from.
This is what I was going to say to you about the multiplayer, is that it always felt to me that it was one of the only sort of shooter games that I know of that was so customizable at the time. There were so many
incredibly
game modes.
customizable.
Yeah.
And if you remember as well, to the point where you can create your own levels.
Yeah.
Like it had a complete map editor in it, and we would use that. I mean, me and my friends would get together with our levels loaded onto cards and sit and play on each other's levels. You know what I mean? And there were some classic ones. We had one. Oh man, this is really taking me back now, because I even remember sitting down with a magazine that had printed out how to reproduce pretty much every GoldenEye map in this map editor. And I'm like putting them all in and then swapping that data with my friends on our memory cards and stuff. Yeah. It was yeah, man, that gets overlooked. Yeah. The fact that it had a full, proper, functioning, really good map editor like that. Yeah, I mean, they were never as good as the ones that were actually on the game.
No,
but there were some classics amongst our friends that come out of that, and it was like, yeah, this is really good.
I wonder if there's any kind of like sort of level designers or whatever that could go back and say, yeah, the first thing I ever made was in Time Splitters, or you know, like sort of Halo, the original like sort of Forge mode or something like that. It'd be really interesting to see if those games actually did spawn, you know, anyone who's making games nowadays.
You do wonder, because like it's always been something that's fascinated gamers. Like, I want to put my own thing together. Yeah. And you know, you look at Mario Maker and stuff like that, and some of the stuff that's come out of that, and to a lesser extent, Little Big Planet, and there were just loads of games that seem to give you that option, and I can't help but tinker with that stuff, just try stuff out and play around and see what I can make. And usually it's crap, but yeah, I'd be interested to see. I mean, it's such a obvious way to just start creating things that you can play.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd be surprised if I'd be more surprised if that's not how people started. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
If that wasn't their first experience of trying to create something.
Yeah, that's like at the moment, like just Little Big Planet and stuff like that. You do wonder like how much of that is sport on Mario Maker. That's the way. Like even my wife is using Mario Maker and making levels and stuff, and you just think like, well, if that's inspiring her, who literally will never pick up another computer game ever in her life, you know, if someone's really into it, like what is that doing to their brain to just think, right, I want to make games? You know,
I'd be more interested to hear from people that stuff has completely put them off.
Yeah.
Maybe they were thinking, yeah, actually, I want to create computer games. I want to be a level designer or whatever. And then they've like played Little Big Planet and went, fuck this.
This is really hard. This is really hard. I've got to do stuff.
Yeah,
I've got a program like
for me.
If and or gates, you know, or whatever they're called.
Also, no matter how good this level is that I've made, it's still Little Big Planet. So what's the point?
What is the point? So you've like completely subverted what I was thinking about with this show, and you know, I was looking for like this hidden gem that wasn't rated very well, and you're saying that like you were saying earlier with Mafia, and
yeah.
So I was going to say to you, what sets this apart from other games in the genre? I mean, like you've mentioned Halo. I mean, there was Perfect Dark. So what sets this apart? What raises this above those or to those levels for you?
I think what set it apart from other PS2 games, I guess the style was just incredible. I remember it looking particularly good at the time, which was a big deal on the PS2. I remember it just looking stunning, and a large part of that is due to the art style, right? Because it was just that cartoony style. It didn't try and look realistic, so there was no terrible sort of polygoned faces or anything like that. It was all like even when you look at GoldenEye models and stuff, you think, wow, yeah, that does not look pretty. Whereas Time Splitters, because it was cartoony, it had a distinct style. And I mean, there are still every now and then there's a friend of mine, whenever we see someone in real life that kind of looks like a Time Splitters 2 character, we have to tell each other about it, try and get a photo of them, because it was that distinct weird long face look that they went for. What set it apart, I think, the amount of content that was in there. At the time, you either had a single player game with a crappy multiplayer sort of tacked on, or you didn't really have like a sole focus like multiplayer game. You know, it was it wasn't.
There was always really story, narrative. You know, you go from A to B and you shoot your way through to such and such a point and get a cutscene.
Also, you didn't really have funny games, and there's a lot of humor in Time Splitters too. Yeah, there's a lot of comedy.
I was watching a lot of cutscenes today, and just trying to reacquaint myself with the game. And yeah, some of the writing and some of the kind of performances in there, considering it's like on a PS2, you think, actually, do you know what? I've seen worse like Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 games. You know?
Well, this is it. It had that charm, and all right, it wasn't. If you go back and watch the cutscenes now, it's not particularly funny, because all it's doing is just doing crappy little parodies of
but it raises the corner of your mouth.
Film tropes, but it was so different because you didn't have that stuff at all, really, on the console game. I know that there was a lot of PC games that sort of that were funny, and there were a lot of funny games, but this, in a first-person shooter style, didn't really exist at the time, and it was kind of so you had that, and then just the whole depth to how much you can play. You never played through the campaign and thought you were done. You play through the campaign, then try to get those gold medals and those gold trophies and stuff.
Yeah.
And then you up the difficulty and then try to do it all again.
Yeah, you're always searching for the unlocks, weren't you? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was because there was so much stuff to unlock. So you would sit down and then you would play through the challenges, and it was like, okay, I've played all the challenges and I've got them all on bronze. Brilliant. Now let's go for silvers, you know? And it never felt stale. It never felt like it was getting old. The campaign did eventually, after we'd smashed it, but we're talking like hundreds of hours of gameplay.
Yeah.
And then you always had the multiplayer to go back to. So after I'd smashed through the campaign, God knows how many times, and focused on the challenges, it had already felt like I'd played an insane amount of this one game. But then I always knew that if I was meeting up with my mates, it would be Time Splitters 2. We'd have 2 copies of Time Splitters 2, 2 PS4s, 2 PS2s, 2 multi-taps, 8 pads. And that was what we were going to be doing for the next 4 or 5 hours.
Like there's not many games you get that amount of value out of, is there? You know, unless it's a 100-hour RPG or something like that.
Yeah, and I don't think I don't rate a game on how many hours of entertainment it gives you, but at the time, it was just like the first game where we could just sit but other than a football game, obviously we played football games all the time. But football games felt like football games, and this was a first-person shooter that didn't even need to be a first-person shooter. Like some of the game modes we'd play where you wouldn't fire a shot. That was the point of the game mode, and it just felt never-ending, the amount of fun that we get. Because say we did play virus mode for like 3 hours straight, we'd then go, okay, now let's shoot each other, and it was kind of crazy that we can play. Yeah. So much time.
You could get something so emergent out of basically the tools they'd given you.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that when you go from virus to sort of team deathmatch, you go from trying to avoid everyone to trying to hunt down everyone, and it was that, and it felt
always
like
using a different skill set.
Yeah, totally.
From like it's that Halo thing of like 30 minutes or 30 seconds of fun or whatever it is. But now you're doing that not just in one game mode, but you're doing it in various game modes, and then making
like all the game modes had their own sort of a sort of appeal. They're all 30 seconds of fun or whatever.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it brought forward that beautiful thing that the GoldenEye did, that again gets overlooked when a lot of people talk about that, is the different weapons and how there were weapons that you preferred to use and weapons that you fell in love with, and certain weapons that you just will live with you forever. That feeling of shooting that gun.
So do you remember what your default, the ultimate thing that you love to use was? Like, what weapon set was it?
I think it was dual pistols.
Right.
If I remember correctly. I mean, no is the answer to that.
No.
For some reason that sticks out in my head, and I can't remember why.
It's probably a speed thing or something like that. You could get the drop on someone. Yeah,
that, and it was like a few headshots and they were dead. It wasn't. There was no faffing around with trying to spray someone with bullets. Like if you held your cool and got your headshots in, then that was that.
Fantastic. Because again,
that's the problem. It was so many years ago now that this game came out that I can't actually remember even if it's got dual pistols in. All I remember was that there was certain weapons that everyone loved. There was there a crossbow in it? I'm pretty sure it was a crossbow.
Yeah,
there was a bouncing grenade launcher thing.
Yeah.
That was really good. I think I remember my favorite character being some robot.
Right. Okay.
Some cyborg thing. And I knew that there was a rule that no one could ever be the monkey, in the same way that no one could ever be Oddjob in GoldenEye.
Right. I love all that. I love all those rules. Yeah, I was going to say I love all those rules that you just make up arbitrarily. Well, you're not being.
Oh, that was not arbitrary. Basically, Oddjob and the monkey was half the height of anyone else.
Right.
And all you had to do was run up to them. And because looking up and down wasn't such an easy thing to do in first-person shooters at that time, it was like you just run up as close as you can to them and you've got to kill, because they can't look down quick enough.
You're just
before
shooting
you
them
cap
in the
their
knees.
off. Yeah. You just pop bullets through their kneecaps. Like, they had no chance. So yeah, that was off limits. Other than that, you could be anyone.
Anyone you like. Well, you've totally made me want to go back and play this now, just for the nostalgia more than anything else. So thank you so much. That's brilliant. That's a brilliant game to start off this show. My last question for you is, if you were going to ask anyone you could think of, that what their honourable mention game would be, who would that person be that you would like to get on this show and see what they come up with?
Probably John Denton.
Really?
So that doesn't help matters, right? Because I know him and I can ask him afterwards. But I bet he's got a really good answer. I bet he's got like a really good answer.
So something really, really sort of just sideways and a bit like kind of not what his personality would give away.
No, I think it'd totally be something that I think you could probably predict it. Or, you could certainly narrow it down to a fair few. But I know that there would be a couple. Like I know no matter what the game is, there'd be a really good reason for it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so hunt him down, get him involved.
Okay, I'll get on there. I'll grab his email or his Twitter or something, and I'll give him a shout. And we'll see,
give him a
see
tweet,
what he comes up with.
Yeah, for real.
That'd be amazing. Right, well, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug, mate?
No, if you just I do the computer game show for spong.com. If you go onto iTunes and search the Computer Game Show podcast, give my show a listen. It's just four guys being very angry at each other.
I love the show. I've loved obviously everything you've done, the Joypod stuff and the Computer Game Show.
Thanks,
and it's
man.
all quality. So,
Are you a big fan of Big Bother?
Yeah. Well, no, actually.
I don't. You've never.
No, I have heard of it. I hate Big Brother. I genuinely, as I've said to you a couple of times, I don't watch TV, and it is the bane of my existence. Because people go,
"Oh,
watch
barely
this."
talked about Big Brother. That was the thing. And we used to get people going, well, "You're a Big Brother podcast, so you don't really talk about Big Brother. Why are you talking about Capone Adam and his visits to the ladies of the night?" And I don't know. It's just more fun than Big Brother this week.
It's not much going on. It's quite weak, isn't it?
But no, thanks. That's
right,
really nice. And you've I met you at various Joypod meets and stuff, and it's always been a pleasure. I'm really happy I was able to pop on.
Oh, cheers. I appreciate it a lot. Anyway,
thanks for asking me.
I know I've said it just there, but I just really want to say a really, really big thank you to Dave for agreeing to chat with me on the show. It was just amazing to hear his thoughts and reminiscences on Time Splitters 2. I mean, how good was that Anaconda track he recommended? Right, well, now we're at the end of the show. I'd better do the obligatory housekeeping. If you have any feedback on this episode, or you're someone who'd like to come on and have a chat with me about your Honourable Mention game, you can get in contact with me either on Twitter at CH4ZZEE or via email at theaibots.com. Thank you so much for listening, and bye bye for now.